Microphone check 1 2. Handheld check 1 2.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to call you back. Any stragglers outside, please join us when you can. So, I hope you've all had a good break. Any of those who've been outside, it is spectacularly beautiful outside, so hope that you get a chance to feel some of the warmth of the sun.
Can we have lunch there tomorrow outside?
That's right. So just as a highlight, you may have noticed in your packages that tomorrow's lunch is a box lunch. It's catered by Wate Catering, which is an Algonquin-led catering service. That service was featured in the New York Times as one of the best examples of formal Indigenous foods. I do not know the detail of the menu. We've been told it'll be fresh and what's out there, and it will be Indigenous-based. The reason it's a box lunch is we actually want you to be able to enjoy some time outdoors and also to have one-on-one conversations with different groups, learn from other groups, hear what they're doing in kind of a more conducive setting for conversation. So tomorrow at lunch, we will have a series of those boxes available. You may have noticed across the street that there's a lovely park. Never mind the name of the park, Confederation Park, but other than that, it's a beautiful space. And so tomorrow, you'll be invited to go outside and enjoy some of that sunshine and really continue the discussions more one-on-one and build relationships between you, because of course, that is the goal of Network. So before we continue into moving through the session, and I know there's some outstanding questions from the first session, we will absolutely get to that. I just want to point a couple things. So you all have packages that you received when you registered. In the package, of course, there's the agenda. There's a printed version of the discussion paper that we'll be discussing next. There's also the 2 submissions that the Indigenous Leadership Initiative made to the standing committees of Parliament. One to the Finance Committee, which was the original vision of the Indigenous leadership to have a large-scale $500 million program. You could see some of the thinking and how we presented that case to the Government of Canada. There's also a brief on the Standing Committee with respect to Indigenous protected areas and Indigenous protected and conserved areas. And the link with Guardians is articulated in that paper. And so it's for your information. These are documents that are also available on our website as well as on the websites of the standing committees. These are public documents. The ILI did testify on both of these documents, so you can also see our testimony on the standing committee websites. Then you'll see there's a brief, it's at the heading, there's a SVA Consulting. This is what I mentioned earlier, that we did an exercise in looking at the impacts of 2 programs specifically in the Northwest Territories, the Decho KOND program and Lutzelke's program, the Nihat Nidene. Did I say that right, Gloria? Which really outlined for them, these are relatively new programs, and when this study was done, I believe the Nihat Nidene program was 7 to 10 years old, and the Decho KOND program was only 2 years old. It looked at, when you spend money on programs like Guardians, how does that trickle down into the communities, and how does that change and impact not only how we manage our lands, but also who we are as people. And in that study, it was revealed that for existing programs, the return on investment, that is for every dollar invested, there is a $2.5 return in value. In the estimation of the group that helped us measure this, with federal support and stable support for core capacity in Guardians, that number could jump to 3.7 to 4 to 1. For kind of scale on that, there is no existing program within the Government of Canada that has that kind of return on investment. And how does that translate? It translates into things like increased rates of retention of language, better frame for delivery of education, a reduction of rates of violence against women because, of course, people are proud and there's a contribution to their identity. Increased rates of health indicators, reduced rates of diabetes. How we did this, we based our methodology on the same methodology that is used in Australia to measure the impact of what they're calling the Working on Country program or the Ranger program. And some of you may or may not know that there's over 2,000 rangers in Australia, and the Australian government has been supporting the program since 2007. There's been over 680 million Australian dollars invested in the program so far. Indigenous peoples in Australia manage 45% of their protected areas, so almost half of the protected areas in Australia that counts towards their international targets are managed by Indigenous peoples, and we are very inspired by that program. Certainly, Australia is another Commonwealth country that has a very similar process in terms of its governance, and we said if they can do it, then heck, we could do it too. And so we invited the very same evaluators to measure that program. In terms of the network and the work that we're embarking on together today, we are hoping that every dollar that is invested will be tracked to ensure that we understand the full breadth of the impact of those dollars, and it really contributes to making the business case for further investment by the federal government, by provincial territorial governments, and other partners in the network. Finally, you'll also see the resolution from the Assembly of First Nations that's dated in December of 2015. It was passed at the Special Chiefs Assembly that always takes place here in Gatineau at the Hilton Lac Lemay. You'll notice that it was moved by Chief Jean-Charles Pétachot of the Conseil des Inuits des Quanchit, and it was seconded by Chief Tammy Cook-Searson of Lac Orange First Nation. When that resolution was proposed and discussed, we were around the Assembly, and there was a lot of buzz and interest. You know, we have partners right across this Canada, right across Turtle Island, and there is not, I can't think of one example where nations have said, we don't want our own people working on our lands. Everybody wants that. And so we're really pleased to be realizing this vision. On the left side of your package, you may notice there's a series of stories, blogs from our website. Of course, if you want to know more about what the ILI is up to, please visit our website at ilinationhood.ca. There's a number of tabs that speak to guardians, that speak to stories, that has news links, as well as our own blog where you can get a sense of our own thinking and perspective on all of these issues. So please visit that website to get more information, and don't hesitate ever to get in touch with us directly if you have any questions or concerns, or you have a vision of what else the ILI could be doing in order to support your work as guardians, stewards, and responsible people for your lands. At this point, I'd like to continue the discussion that we started this morning. I know there was a remaining question, at least one question that we reserved, and so please feel free to join us. And again, as you've been thinking over break, if more things have arisen, now is a great time to bring them up.
Good morning. I think there are follow-up questions related to the previous speakers. My name is Murray Ned. I'm from BC. Fraser Valley, one of the Sallow communities, Sumas First Nation. Currently, I work for 30 First Nations in the Lower Fraser. It's the mouth of the Fraser to Yale and the Canyon. And we've established a governance protocol in 2014, but we do not have a mandate to represent or speak on behalf of those First Nations. So I suppose my question is in and around what space and resources are going to be provided to bring those groups together and establish what we're talking about here, which is the principles and the governance moving forward. My secondary question is in and around what space is being made for treaty obligations. In BC, there's the Pacific Salmon Treaty. Canada, Alaska, and the southern U.S., right down to Oregon, participate. So is there space being made for those considerations, because all of the Pacific salmon are being managed under that treaty? And of course, what comes with treaty and management of fisheries and resources is the need to provide guardianship. So I'll just keep that as brief as possible. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much for your questions. So maybe I'll tackle the latter and then move to the former question. In terms of obligations to treaties, you know, this network is really up to you to design exactly what it needs to be responsible for and how it works. You'll notice in the discussion paper that I'm just about to walk through that we've certainly thought about kind of those regional realities. And in British Columbia, as you may know, on the coast, there is a Coastal Guardian Watchman network that's managed by the Coastal Stewardship Network, attached to the Coastal First Nations, that have really developed their own methodologies and their own interactions with those realities. We've got some representatives here in the room who can speak to how that works. Clearly, in terms of treaties, whether it's the historical treaties or other specific resource-based treaties, of course this has to fulfill the obligations, and of course it has to enable us to be able to be who we are in what we say we are in those treaties. And so this is really an opportunity for those obligations to come through. We were just discussing yesterday with Ovid Mercredi, who's one of our senior advisors, and of course Ovid has been very active in the treaty discussions nationally for, I don't want to reveal how old he is, but for a very long time. And his vision was, you know, the intention of the treaties was for us to be who we are and to continue to be able to have that relationship with the lands. And whatever we are doing here has to reflect that. And in fact, I think you've revealed a bit of a gap in our discussion paper, and you'll notice that it is there's a big draft right across the paper. And so I've already taken notes to make sure that we include language around that reality within the structure and the framework. In terms of the process for you to go back and really work with your nations, of course there's going to be capacity for that. What we've been promoting is that in the $25 million, some of that money should go directly to programs. We need to really show that when there's an investment, that it really catalyzes in terms of results and can change things locally, nationally, and regionally. In terms of the business case and the development of the terms of reference and how the network is going to work, I assume that will be an evolution. That the network will start, work with the governance institutions right across Canada, the leadership, and specify its roles and activities. Of course, we do not want to overstep any leadership or their responsibility to that leadership in their lands.
We've also said the government has the whole of government response.
Right.
Fisheries has to respond.
Right.
Fisheries,
Right. Right. Dave is telling me what to say. On the partnership side, when we're saying that this is an opportunity to really have Government of Canada partner with us, and that is exactly what the Minister of Environment recommitted to us yesterday, on behalf of the whole of government. We mean the whole of government. And so the Department of Fisheries and Oceans has been participated to some thinking behind here. You may know that the Department of Fisheries and Oceans actually has existing fisheries guardians funding that has indeed been already funding programs since 1992. In fact, I'm proud to say that the Innu Nation in particular had a strong influence on the creation of that program because it emerged out of the closure of the Atlantic salmon commercial fishery. DND, the Department of National Defense in the north, there is a number of rangers who are already on the land, already monitoring and have an expertise and equipment to do that job. They see some real potential in being a partner in this program. Natural Resources Canada is very interested in all of their divisions, whether it's the Canadian Forest Service, the environmental assessment process, or even their major projects division. This is really about setting the conditions for being able to have that relationship. And I'm a forester by trade. I do forest management plans and negotiate co-management agreements around those kind of resources. It's really important that when we do that, we have the ability to fully participate to those relationships and fully fulfill our obligations and to be able to express what that means. When we say we want a nation-to-nation relationship, it's not just us saying that. We have a whole responsibility of building and working through what we mean by that and setting ourselves up to do that right. Again, we are plugged into the Assembly of First Nations, and we regularly report to the Assembly. It's our hope that once you as experts, that's why you're here, you are the ones who are making the programs work, those that exist. You are the ones who are blazing the trail in creating the programs in your communities for those that don't exist. You know what the requirements are. Once that model is developed, I expect fully that there will be deep engagement with leadership right across Canada. It's also, some of us are very plugged into some of the high-level discussions around the nation-to-nation framework at a federal level, the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This should also coordinate with that. I hope I've answered your question. Thank you. Ethel.
Mercy, thank you. I wanted to make an observation, I guess. We're not supposed to observe or comment. We're supposed to ask a question. I'm from the Satu region in the Northwest Territories. I spent 18 years in Parliament, 12 of those in Cabinet, trying to convince government that, like all of the other elected, I'm looking at Dave Porter and Steve Kakwe, people that have been elected, it's a real struggle even internally to convince government that they should do certain things. But they've come along. Times have changed. The dialogue is different now. We extracted $1.6 billion from the government with HRDC to do training programs. And Aboriginal leadership exercised their power. They said, we'll run it, we'll do it. And we said, okay, but you got to have advocates inside. Even then, it's really tough. Same with reconciliation. If we can do it for training and development, we can do it for housing. So that happened with housing too. The money went directly to the Aboriginal groups. Best thing they ever did in my mind. And the Aboriginal groups are evolving, developing, growing their power, growing their resources. The next thing that happened is other programs started looking at releasing the authorities and jurisdiction over to the Aboriginal people. And the biggest problem they had was amongst themselves, reconciling, internalizing all the issues and working them out. I don't see any different here. If they can do it for training and housing, they can do it for the environmental stewardship. And I think this $25 million is a dry run for getting $1 billion, maybe 400, 500 million, then $1 billion to allow the people that know the best how to do what they do with the land. You don't have to be trained to love the land or to know the land. You do. Your people do that. That's what they do. You don't have to be trained or oriented to your culture and values. Many of you have that already right from the time you're children. So you have a natural, I guess, process or foundation for that. I see it easy. For years and years we ask, and like Miles said, generation after generation, ask government to allow us to do best what we would do for ourselves, but they decided they knew better and they did residential school, they did other things. It didn't work for us. So now we want to be able to do that. And I think with the 25 million, you can build a base, you can build an example, you can build a proposal that does that. But please don't think that the guardianship is a panacea for everything. It isn't. It's not a panacea for everything. Shape your expectations to what it is that you want out of this, and it'll make it workable. If you want too many things and you use a scattergun approach, that's one thing I learned about being in elected politics. Somebody once said to me, pick 2 or 3 things, work on it, make it work. Instead of picking 20 things and using the scattergun approach, not finishing anything. So I think if you focus, I think that'll work. Legislative base doesn't give anybody the ability, the intuition, the EQ or anything to do what's the right thing for you. That's yours. That belongs to you. And now the government is speaking a different language than 30 years ago, even when I first entered the scene. They're speaking about government to government. They are lining up the stars for you, so grab the opportunity and do something with it. But be specific about it, because if you're not, then we're going to be in that scattergun mode. And I really think that the answers belong to us. Almost, this is just a forerunner to many other things. The governments of the day, like provincially, territorially, I believe with the emergence of self-government will become vestiges of certain jurisdictions, certain repositories of like maybe certain laws, but the rest of it will go to the people eventually. That's where we're going. Otherwise, they're lying to us, and I don't think so. I think they mean it, and I think we need to take them on it, but we need to really hone our expectations. We need to really build something here. You're given $25 million to build something. That's quite a bit of money, in my mind, to build a proposal. And do you think we can do it, Val? That's my question.
No. Thank you, Ethel. Not only do I think we can do it, I think we have to. I think we all have our individual nation's cultural responsibilities. Some of us have prophecies that have called and let us know that this is our time. Elder Corshane spoke to it this morning in his video. This is our time, and this is our chance to do it. So yes, absolutely. That's why we're here. Any other thoughts and questions? Terry?
My name is Terry Dorward. I'm the project coordinator for the Tlaoquit Tribal Parks Guardian Program, which is situated in Tofino. I guess my question and some comments are, is there going to be some indicators to know whether or not they are lying to us? And, I guess that's the kind of time frame that we're kind of thinking about. I know we've been involved in treaty negotiations for 25 years, and they lied to us. They lied to us all the way. And our people got out of that process. Now we're in the court case for our fishery court case, and those First Nations who are, don't I guess subscribe to what the government wants us to do. They do get slapped on the hand. The distribution of wealth in Tofino area is grossly misrepresented. We have 1.2 million people that travel through Tofino in a year, and yet Parks Canada gives us $30,000 for running a guardian program, which is completely, you can't do nothing with that. In other areas of our traditional territory, BC Parks, and all these jurisdictions that have taken over huge portions of our land where we have no treaty. In other areas, in Ha'okman Tribal Park, we have, it's just the Wild West out there. Our people, very shoestring budget, just try to get out there and enforce our traditional laws. But I like what I'm hearing here. I guess for a people that have been through a process and seen, a lot of lies, just want to know if, there's some indicators there. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry, for your question. In terms of indicators of lies or indicators of success, that absolutely, it will be part of the business plan that we are going to develop here, and the network is then going to take on to determine exactly that. Now, when we approached government to say, are you interested in being a partner in this kind of initiative, there is a genuine movement across this country to do this work. Canada, are you in? We didn't ask Environment Canada, are you in? We didn't ask INAC if we're in. We asked Canada if they're in. And they responded in turn with the whole of government approach. When we meet with McKenna, she is speaking on behalf of the whole of government. The existing...
About the metrics, yesterday the minister was really strong that we build metrics in terms of what we want outcomes, and we measure them in our relationship. Just reiterate that.
That's right. So that's one of the reasons I highlighted the work that we had done in terms of measuring the impact. The minister yesterday, one of the strongest messages that she passed is saying, I want to know that we're actually creating change. I want to know that this is not just another program where the dollars get lost and we're not achieving what we set out to achieve. I personally, she's gone on a limb, right? Her voice is, I have gone on a limb on this. I believe in you. I believe in the nation-to-nation relationship. And I want to make sure that we can measure, track, and adjust as we're going over time, as the relationship grows. I've sat in the band office and managed Guardians programs. I've spent, when I was doing that, about 80% of my time was spent on applying for various funding proposals that changed every year, that had online forms that might, I lived in Labrador, our internet wasn't the best. Sometimes it took me a week to fill out an online form because it would freeze and I would lose my data, and that's frustrating. And we'd get maybe $30,000 from one program, $25,000 from another program. That's not enough to do what we're talking about here. The benefit of working with the whole of government is we want to take out those silos, take out those separate initiatives, and really think about this as a whole. And I have Innu Nation representatives here, so I'm going to ask for forgiveness for speaking about the Innu Nation example without asking the Innu Nation's permission. But I worked for the Innu Nation as the environment manager for a number of years. And when I had to think about the role of Guardians, I wasn't thinking about, okay, we have a contaminants program and we need someone to do contaminants. Or we have caribou and we've got a problem with our caribou, so I got to hire someone to do caribou. I was thinking, I've got people in our communities that have skills and a perspective and something to offer for our future. How can I enable, by using those programs, to do that? Our hope is that the network will be able to do that on your behalf, so that there's not any case where someone is having to spend 80% of the time filling out a form and reporting back, and they're actually thinking about this more strategically, more holistically, and ensuring that it works for us. In the $500 million proposal that we initially made to the Government of Canada, our estimate is that at a minimum, for one Guardian, it costs at least $100,000 in salaries, equipment, and training per Guardian. And that is only when you have a structure around you. That is only when you have a core group that is able to work within that budget. The Innu Nation budget at the time that I was managing for 18 Guardians was about $1.5 million to be able to make that happen. That's the minimum. That doesn't include buying a boat to be able to monitor on the ocean. The coastal First Nations have some serious equipment to be able to do their work. Some of those machines are multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. It doesn't include the ability to have a truck and to be able to go around and really monitor your lands, to have the ability to perhaps go in the helicopter and track the impacts of hydro development and mining and the movement of caribou. Those are all requirements that are going to be needed in this program. That's why we have this larger vision. And that's why we need to get it right now. And so absolutely we're going to be tracking indicators, and absolutely we're going to call out if there are lies and if promises are not being fulfilled. It's actually part of the reason why the Indigenous Leadership Initiative wants to step back from this process, because we want to have the ability to do just that, to advocate for the network, to advocate for you all, and to create that space and make sure that Canada knows what works and what doesn't work. Canada knows that Indigenous peoples are struggling. Canadians know that. They need to know that the solutions to that struggle are in all of us.
Ama ihlaka nix nisum simigat sigmana ni dogs. As not be at sig will ni will ama ihlukuna. I'm Chief Harry Nice. My initial chief name is Nouse from the Eagle House. I'm the Director of Fish and Wildlife for the Nisga'a Lissam's government. We are a government. We collectively decided as a people to go the route we did. We researched back in the 60s and the 70s who we were. Can you imagine that, who we were? We had to research ourselves. And the names that we have. And as many of you here, the residential school was interruption in our communities, a huge interruption. We had to relearn our cultural ways. We had to relearn the mountains, the rivers. I don't hunt. I don't trap. Those were my late father. My late father was, in our family, was the last to do that because we were at residential school. So Canada, with all their apologies, this hasn't come to fruition in any way. Because here we are, we're talking yet another initiative to bring them to account. But I like this program. I like the way it's going. It was what we, as a Nisga'a Nation, worked towards. But we had to sue the government to get to where we were, as many of you know, in the 1970s, the Calder case. And that led, of course, to many of First Nations across the country to benefit and to work with that document. It is a struggle. It's a struggle within ourselves, really. I'm here because there was some language in your paper that said about fisheries and how to or to initiate some work with youth. We're struggling with the youth, as many of you are. They're not coming to the table with respect to, they're coming to their own groups, but they're not bellying up really to the table. I have a staff of 47 technicians. I call them my technicians. They're all Nisga'a. We have a consulting a group from Victoria area, LGL, who helps us. But the young people, those 40 people have been with me for over 20 years when we took over our own programs on the Nassau fishery. But it is something that we need to work at. I think this, and I'm looking toward this particular initiative here to encourage the young people. We do have a Nisga'a University College in our valley, and it's run by my wife, and she has much success with that. But at the same time, it takes a lot of encouragement to get to where we were. And as an aside, Madam Chair, my wife and I decided we met at residential school, Port Alberni. We courted for a year, and we said, "The heck with this, let's go and get married." But we didn't tell our kids. We're still in our early teens, or late teens, rather. But they did the math anyway. But we made a difference. We said, we're going to make a difference. We're going to go back and then change the picture with the residential school. And today, as a proud father, 3 sons and 2 daughters, they each have 2 university degrees each in their own ways. But we had to encourage them. We lived as a family. Had to it was really, really tough. But we made a decision as a group, as a family. And I think that's where we need to encourage ourselves with that, all of us, to stay as a family. And when we went to university as mature students at UBC, we took the kids, and the kids came with us, and they saw what they could become, or they lived what they could become. So that in itself, and I like the language of the vision that's here with the paper, because I think it will encourage a lot of you. That's why you're here. You see something that you want. You see your future down the road. But that being said, federal government or provincial government, they're not your friends. They aren't. They drag you down as long as they can. If you want to change a certain little policy that they have with respect to what you want to do on your own land. They drag it out. They drag it out. I don't know how many times our leadership have come here in Ottawa to tell and ask the minister to get the bureaucrats to tools down, if you will, and to listen to what we have negotiated and agreed to as a government to government. But that said, I think that's really important for us to focus. And I was doing sort of the math with the 25 million. And I was looking at how many First Nation groups across our country. 40,000 per band. If we all went together as we all made an application. But I just wanted to, ask a question. When is the intake, I guess, if you will, for applications?
Thank you. Chief, that's an excellent question. To be quite frank, the minister has told us that she would like to see some of the money invested this summer in programs. The challenge is, where should that happen? Should that happen, just split it up amongst everybody who applies? And will we be able to achieve our goal of demonstrating the full potential of the programs by doing that? Should it be invested in regions? Should it be invested in existing programs to stabilize them? Because I know that a number of existing programs are struggling to even survive. I know that the Nation, for example, doesn't have a coordinator of its program that's full-time. That program has existed since 1992, has had up to 18 staff. It is still struggling. So should that be where the investment is made? Should we make more of the investment in developing the business plan for now and set it up later? Those are all the questions that we're here to answer. The other context that you may have noticed is that in this year's budget, there was a significant investment in conservation, a $1.3 billion investment in conservation that is unprecedented for our country to make that kind of commitment. The reason for that commitment is Canada has signed on to, under the Convention for Biological Diversity, to the Aichi targets, which is to achieve at least 17% protection on terrestrial lands, 10% protection on marine areas. In terms of the land piece, Canada right now has 10.6% of its lands protected. That goal and that target has to happen between now and 2020. That means there's very little time for Canada to significantly increase its protection of lands. Where are the best opportunities for those lands to happen? They are all going to be on Indigenous lands. The minister has recognized that and has said that. Not only that, she invested in a process called the Pathways to 2020 process, which had an Indigenous Circle of Experts group gathered who did a consultation right across this country. The consultation, I believe, was around $5 million to do that. You'll hear about it from Stephen Nita a little bit later tonight. And when we spoke to the minister, we said, Minister, all Indigenous protected areas should be accompanied by Guardians programs or programs like this. And when we say Guardians, by the way, we don't necessarily mean that you have to call your program Guardians. You can call them what they are. In Inuimun, it's Minashkwat Kanatu Kwatak, I believe. Ni Hat Ni Dene, the Decho Kehondi, the Haida Watchman program. That's exactly the vision that we need to realize. So it is, we think it's possible. We know it's not going to be easy, but no one is going to do it for us. This is our job. It's our responsibility. And if we're going to be who we say we are, as Miles says, then let's just do that and hold the government accountable. You may have noticed also this summer that there were 10 principles to the nation-to-nation relationship that was released by the Minister of Justice. Those principles lay out things like consent, how the relationship should happen, who should have those relationships. Those are good indicators of the shift that Ethel was talking about earlier. Let's make them accountable to what they say.
So I have a question about eligibility. There, on page 4 of this document, there's a big box there that talks about who would or wouldn't be eligible for the pilot program. I wonder if you guys could just elaborate a little more on what nations would or wouldn't be eligible, because there's some fairly specific language in there that references, you know, control or jurisdiction over territory, and that's going to vary quite broadly across Canada.
Yeah. So let's start walking through this, and I'll give you a sense of where this is coming from. Again, this is only a discussion paper. It was meant to catalyze, incite thought. You know, some of us have been thinking about this for a number of years and certainly have a perspective. But this is a document that can be entirely rewritten. And we're hoping that through this workshop, that's exactly what's going to happen. And so let's walk through this. I know also that it was only sent to you over the weekend. I apologize for that. We are a small but nimble, dedicated team. And so I'm going to take the time to walk through it with you now so that you're all aware of what it says and where things come from. And then after that, I'll specifically address your question, and then we can go into a discussion right through to lunch. How about that? So again, from the ILI perspective and from our partners that we've been working with for a number of years, you know, we propose a vision that the National Indigenous Guardians Network is to catalyze, promote, support, connect, and expand Guardian initiatives across Canada as a means of empowering our nations, governments, and communities to honor and fulfill our cultural responsibilities to our homeland and enable a true nation-to-nation relationship. The Indigenous cultural responsibility, what we mean by that is that it comes from the land and it includes moral and spiritual leadership. It means that we are responsible for also fulfilling our spiritual responsibilities. It's also a way and means of connecting and reinforcing and strengthening the connection between youth, elders, and our knowledge keepers. Some of you may remember the video that we produced after the last gathering. There's a great quote there from Robbie Dick from Ross River, who speaks about how there's a gap amongst our youth and our elders. And being on the land and being guardians allows us to really bridge that gap and think about and learn from our elders and our knowledge keepers who know the responsibility to the land, who can hear the land and help our youth understand and learn that as well. Why are we doing this? Well, because it's our time. And because we've been doing it since time immemorial. It's our sacred responsibility to do that, to care for our relationships, both with the land and the species that inhabit them. We are reasserting our authority and jurisdiction over these lands and waters, and that assertion presents an opportunity to formalize those responsibilities through initiatives like Guardians, creating laws and policies and guides and ways that we are going to do this as nations, as peoples, over time. It's a unique, constructive, and practical opportunity for the Government of Canada to actually fulfill what it says it wants to fulfill, which is to have a renewed nation-to-nation and Inuit-to-Crown relationship with the Indigenous peoples based on recognition, rights, and respect. Those of you who may have noticed the federal mandate letters that for the first time that were released under the Trudeau government speak to this. The very first line in the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs mandate letter is to forge a renewed nation-to-nation relationship with the Indigenous peoples of Canada. This is an opportunity to help meet that goal. As we've discussed earlier, they do reduce unemployment, they create new employment, they create opportunities for talented youth and positive role models for communities to come. Now, I don't want to, again, I won't name individuals, but I know individuals who have gone from, frankly, having very little hope as young people, not knowing where they were going to do in their future, and therefore living in a cycle of trauma, to now being community leaders that are influencing their youth. If I could quote Dati Tetso, who presented to the Northwest Territories session on community-based monitoring, she said, "My dream for my daughter is for her to want to be a guardian when she grows up." That's the opportunity we have right now. The success of this program will depend on those programs being linked to decision making. We're not just talking about monitoring and gathering data here. We're talking about our nations being able to make decisions on our lands, and those decisions being well informed and well tied to the relationship with that land. It's a real reciprocity. That's a hard thing to say for a French speaker. Reciprocity. When we met with government, we had Dave and Miles alluded to it, we actually had over 160 individual meetings with various government representatives at all levels, from cabinet to other MPs in all parties, to the Senate, to senior officials, all saying that this was exciting. In fact, we had a letter that was signed by almost 60 MPs from all parties, I believe, that supported this vision. We also had letters of support from large industry associations like the Canadian Mining Association that said, hey, we have our own social responsibility requirements under our corporate model, and this is actually a great opportunity for us to get to know and build deeper relationships with the nations upon whose territories we operate. So after the 120 meetings and various process, in Budget 2017, government had said, we'll initiate a pilot of $25 million. If you look at the language that is in the commitment of the budget, it says that this fund is to initiate a pilot under the responsibility of Environment and Climate Change Canada and Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada, now CERNA, and I don't know what the new acronym is for the Indigenous Services Division, under their responsibility, but on behalf of the whole of government, to really show and demonstrate how these programs could work. The minister yesterday also reiterated that she does recognize this as an initial investment, which means that she knows that there's an opportunity for a much more fulsome and structured and built relationship, including a much larger investment. It's our job to hold her to that. So since Budget 2017, I explained that there was a policy space and some work that wasn't done, that delayed the ability to spend the money for the first year, actually right up until now. This is the first year that everything is in place in order to be able to start to spend that money. What we did is we created 2 committees. One was at the ministerial level that included Jesse. In fact, Jesse was in the room this morning. Jesse McCormick is the Director of Policy in Minister McKenna's office. Jesse was the lead on that process, but we also had policy directors and staffers within Minister's office from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, from Natural Resources Canada, from Indigenous and Northern Affairs, all participating and ensuring that the ministers were well aware of the progress and the plans and where this was going. That's a pretty rare process for $25 million to have that kind of committee and process going. The second committee that we had is an officials committee where we had the senior bureaucrats from those various departments participating and looking at how could this work, the mechanics of how the monies could flow. Are there other sources in existing programs? Could we collate and use and say, well, maybe AFSAR could be combined, the Aboriginal Fund for Species at Risk could be combined in part with the Fisheries Guardian Program, could be combined in part with Contaminants Program, and that augment and continue to contribute to the $25 million. Are there other sources? In the $1.3 billion that was announced this year, the word guardian is mentioned in that investment. So what is the possibility within that money to augment some funding for the program? That's exactly the questions that we're asking those committees. Now, in interacting with those committees, and I mentioned the 10 principles, one of them is a distinction-based principle, which means that the government is obligated to interact with Inuit, Métis, and First Nations separately. We don't know how that will translate in detail on this program, but that question has, in fact, delayed the process. Initially, we were hoping to invite you and maybe up to 600 more people at a national gathering, to really have serve as the genuine consultation opportunity for the creation of this program. Unfortunately, we haven't had that chance because of the understanding and really the questions around how could this look like mechanically. That gathering is now committed to take place in the fall, hopefully in October. In the meantime, the ILI said, we need to start to think about this. We need to start to work. We can't wait to get this going. And so, as you may or may not know, this entire opportunity and this entire workshop is funded by the ILI and its partners at the International Boreal Conservation Campaign. You know, we wanted to put our money where our mouths were. We are determined to see this come through, and this is the opportunity to do that. Now, what's a guardian? We've deliberately left that definition wide because, again, we fully believe that the definition of what guardians are is up to the nations that have the initiatives. But generally speaking, guardians should be a part of the decision-making process within communities. They should be an expression of our nationhood and our jurisdiction. They should enact our laws, both on lands and waters, and help enable our governments and nations to develop their own laws and policies and knowledge. In the case of, again, I'm using my own example, the Innu Nation, we actually had knowledge-generating sessions that were run by the Guardians program to generate our new knowledge in this and acquire new information on how we can be more responsible, whether that was for forestry or mining or other managements. In shorthand, I always like to say they're essentially our moccasins and mucklucks on the ground. They're our ground troops to make sure that things are done right. Labrador is a territory of 300,000 square kilometers in size. You could put in all of the maritime provinces and Newfoundland within the area of Labrador. The Environment Canada has one officer that works to monitor and make sure that their laws are enacted in that territory. And that officer has barely a travel budget, and he's based out of Goose Bay. What if something is happening north of Nain? What if something is happening in the Mealy Mountains? Do they have the capacity to enact and do anything about it? Helsuk had a spill, the Nathan E. Stewart. Does government have capacity to really respond fully to those initiatives? We can. Not only can we need to if we're going to be who we say we are. That's our chance. In terms of the structure of the network, again, we as an ILI fully believe that if we're going to be nations, then we need to have the authority over our own affairs, which includes the definition of the Guardians programs. We also know from experience that there is a genuine benefit of regionality, of working between our communities within our nations and working with other nations. And there's a lot of examples in this room of what that can look like, from Unama'ki and folks in Cape Breton to the Coastal Stewardship Network to Innu Nation that works amongst two communities and beyond. Finally, there is a need for some sort of structure at the national level that will help determine what the network does and how, and advise on how the money needs to be spent in order to achieve the goals of the network. We've called it a table of nations. It could be a board. It could be a council. It could be whatever you want it to be. We've also, you may have noticed that we've proposed, for now, a partnership with the Government of Canada. Why? Because this is a beginning of a long-term relationship on these issues. And if we want Canada to really take ownership over where this is going, they need to be, excuse me, at the table to do that. That is not to say that that is the full model for the future, ad vitam aeternam. What may happen is the network would say, you know what, Canada, we're good now. You're our partner. We're going to take it completely over. That could be a model. It's really up to you and your leadership and your nations to help us, guide us in what that should look like.
So part of the process will be that?
Exactly. You'll notice as well that we deliberately made this kind of an upside down from the traditional model. Like usually you have the national kind of structure and then it breaks down. But we really want to emphasize again that these are your programs, they're up to you. The network needs to serve you and not the other way around.
So we should be in control and we should have more than 50% say.
Great.
We've given them their chance.
So for the purposes, for us, as we've been thinking about these programs and looking at the impacts of them, we found that Guardians programs meet and reach their full potential when they're associated to nations being nations and exercising their jurisdiction and authority over those lands. It is from our perspective, a necessity to have a land base for programs like this to work. In fact, if you ask the programs, this long-standing programs that exist and are here in the room, and Colin, again, they have the oldest standing formal program. Captain Gold started in 1973 with a canoe from Sears Roebuck. And then in 83, I believe, the program was formalized. And then in the Guayhanas Agreement in 80,
Don't talk about that.
it was formalized even more. That's really about the Haida exercising their jurisdiction over their lands. As Miles has said, and I know Lada, you've said this as well, every inch of Haida Gwaii requires Haida consent. That is because of their process.
Every inch of Canada requires consent.
That's what the minister said. So let's make it so. In terms of regional networks, again, we really believe that working together is worthwhile. Well, we have a full session where we'll discuss this, but on things like data management, tracking trends, planning, doing land use planning, education and training, there's lots of reasons to do that together, getting economies of scale. Those are all kinds of reasons why working together and building our nations is important. The other thing is, you know, as the Government of Canada has committed to this nation-to-nation relationship, we don't know that it will necessarily work to have 634 different nation-to-nation tables. It might be better for the Innu Nation to be the Innu Nation and interact and have a relationship with the Government of Canada. It might be better to have the Dene Nation be the Dene Nation and interact with the Government of Canada. It's really up to those nations to determine what that is. And that regional approach could actually help reinforce that. A little story about my nation on the Quebec side. You know, we, again, separated for 9 years, and Caribou brought us together. I never thought in my lifetime that I would see that. Now they're negotiating together on wind turbines and getting benefits from Hydro-Quebec and developing their own projects. That never would have been possible if they wouldn't be working together. Perhaps the Guardians could help enable that as well. The Table of Nations again. As we were thinking about how this network could really lead to the bigger partnership and the bigger model, we have to be clear on how we support programs. Again, many existing programs are struggling with stability. Some of us rely on coastal opportunity funds and other government initiatives that are finite. Some rely on impact benefit agreements, again, that are finite, that have trusts perhaps associated to them or not. Some rely on short-term co-management agreements. Innu Nation used to negotiate its forestry agreements on a 5-year basis with a yearly appropriation from cabinet. All of those things are struggles. This contribution from the network could be exactly what stabilizes the core team upon which those other opportunities can be built. It's much easier to approach a mine or a forest company or another proponent on your land and say, I want more guardians with this project, if you have an existing core team and can prove the model. If you don't have that, it's that much harder to negotiate those structures. So that's why for us, we think that it's really important to have that core capacity supported by this program. I'll just walk through, Ethel, and then we'll go to questions. We also think that there's, again, everywhere we go in this country, we hear we need our own people working on their lands. And there's a need for this model to grow and to show how it can emerge, and to do that in the different contexts across this country. Those programs will look different if you're under a land claims process, if you're in a treaty area, or if you're not, if you're in a tidal area. All of those kind of ways of working needs to be accommodated by this network. Some may say, look, we have hereditary chiefs that are working together as hereditary chiefs with our councils. That's working great. That's the structure that should be supported. Some may say, you know what, it's the band that is the right place to do this. It's really up to you to decide, but the network needs to be responsive to all of that and allow for growth of programs in all of those contexts. Today, by the way, when we say there's about 30 programs, we don't mean that there's programs in 30 communities. We mean that there's 30 initiatives that may or may not be working together. And that should grow. The other thing is, we need, as Dave said, we need to prepare our people to be able to do this job. And I firmly believe that the profession of guardianship needs to be recognized in this country. When a mine arrives in your territory, they should expect that part of the deal is guardians, and that it's a profession in itself, and it is recognized as such. That may mean that the network should perhaps consider things like a curriculum framework. You know, what should guardians do and know to be designated as guardians? Should they know their language, or at least be learning their language? Should they have a sense of what their relationship is with their lands and their laws within their nations? Should they know how decisions are being made by the people in their nations? Should they know how to interact with elders and understand when elders are saying the land is speaking to you? Those may be some of the elements of what a curriculum framework should consider. The specifics of what you need to do your job should be regionally based. So in the Coastal First Nations, for example, I attended this Coastal Stewardship Network's meeting last year at the Hawkeye Institute, and there was a captain training the boat operators on how to navigate in the ocean and how to be safe. That may not be necessary if you're in Lutsuke. And so those kind of specifics should be enabled within that approach. You'll notice, too, in your breakout sessions that all of these topics are laid out, and we will be discussing. You will have a chance to really input on these topics within the breakout groups. So in conclusion, again, the ILI is committed to enabling, helping, and supporting in any appropriate way this vision. Ethel.
Should I use the mic?
Yes, please.
I raised 3 kids, so I don't have problems speaking loud. I'm just thinking about money. In order to resolve the issue of inclusion and representation, those are the biggest challenges in doing funded programs. What we did with pathways, or what do we end up calling them? ASETs now, I guess. The HRDC, $1.6 billion, is biggest problem was to make sure all the groups were included. And that was ITC, First Nations, AFN, and the other groups, the Métis, and then we had some other groups, and there was a lot of dispute about how groups are funded. one of the things that we did is we had agreement holders. We had national agreement holders, where those agreement holders, for instance, where I come from is called Sahtu. They were an agreement holder. They were allotted a certain amount of money, and that's what they got every year. We had two committees. We had a structural committee that dealt with political difficulties to be negotiated at a higher level, and we had a technical committee about how the program functions. And you need those to resolve those kind of issues. But the question is, can we use these elements of existing programs as best practices to save money?
Thank you, Ethel. Those are excellent contributions. I hope so. Any other comments or thoughts and discussions?
Thanks for the overview, Val. I heard earlier that you committed to a placeholder for international considerations, and I think that's really good. And perhaps that needs to be incorporated into the structure somewhat moving forward. And I wanted to explain a little bit about my participation at the international level. Pacific Salmon Treaty has a Pacific Salmon Commission. Good to see Harry Nice here. He's part of our First Nations caucus and the work we do there. But when I started in 2013, I thought I would be serving the interests of First Nations in BC. Well, I was educated fairly quickly that my obligation was to Canada, not First Nations. So that's why I wanted to express the importance of ensuring that we have a placeholder for international considerations, because there is a treaty that's being negotiated as we speak. It's coming to a conclusion. Should have been done in January, but the Americans were pretty positioned, and it's kind of bled into just part of May. But my experience from that is that there's international obligations that water down our First Nations and food, social, and ceremonial rights to salmon. And we have to be cognizant of that, because when DFO and Canada finish the treaty negotiations, then they have to figure out what happens at a domestic level. That domestic obligation includes commercial and the recreational sector, obligations to stakeholders. And in many cases, the stakeholders supersede our priority access. So we have to be careful what we do there. And then our food, social, and ceremonial rights are provided for. It's almost like you get what's left over at the end of the day. So I appreciate you being able to provide a bit of a placeholder for that international consideration. I'm not sure if the fisheries is the only scenario across Canada, but I'm sure there's others that should be considered. Thank you.
Thank you. I would argue that the considerations around the Convention for Biological Diversity and the target is another, that we should really understand what our obligations are as nations and how we can help meet them, and that commitment the minister has asked and created the space for that. And so that's another example. The North American Bird Treaty Act, the Bird Migration Act, is another example. I would argue that NAFTA and short softwood lumber may be another example. So indeed, there are a number of places where this could come into play, and we have taken great notes. Frank?
I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank the Indigenous Leadership Council from the Boreal for making space to advance this work. I think we've, as we come out of the intense colonization and we move toward decolonization, this is really critical for us. And I've been working in the space of stewardship for most of my career. I was the founding director for the Integrated Resource Management Office for my nation, and then went and worked for Coastal First Nations as the director of land and marine stewardship before I went back to Bella Bella and coordinated our tribal journeys, gathering of maritime indigenous nations along the Pacific coast. But anyway, one of the things that I was thinking about those decades of work and what that actually meant, and would it like to try to summarize it. I came up with this notion or a metaphor of a decision tree. And I think it's kind of a universal truth amongst Indigenous engagement, whether it's with corporations, publicly crown corporations, or publicly traded companies. What usually happens is these groups are coveting resources from the land or the sea, and then they contact our governments, whether they're the bands or whatever, and then from there, so there's three branches in this decision tree. In my mind, it goes to our government, and then building institutional capacity on the stewardship side through these guardian initiatives. And in British Columbia, because we are non-treaty, we've signed a reconciliation agreement with the government of British Columbia where there's a commitment to shared decision-making and revenue and benefit sharing without extinguishing our Indigenous title. And then we from there, we go from, if it is in compliance to our land use plans, which are ratified through orders in council, so there's a legal effect to that, through ecosystem-based management. Then it goes, if it complies to our land use plans, then it can go over to economic development, and that way things are done in a more sustainable way. And at the highest level, I think that's the intention for us, is to look at the shared decision-making piece is around making sure that things are done in a sustainable way, and then the revenue and the benefit sharing is around the economic opportunities, creating meaningful employment, but not destroying the natural capital of our ecosystems that have sustained us throughout the millennia. So I think that's really a critical part of ensuring that this is palatable to our people. Otherwise, it's going to be very challenging to move forward. I guess those are some of the thoughts that I'm having around this process. And then the other piece, just on a personal note, is I really think that it's important, and we're going to go drill deeper into this, is the whole issue of capacity and training. It's in my mind, and I think in our community's mind, it's imperative that those key positions of leadership rest solidly in the hands of our own Indigenous people, that it doesn't rest with outsiders, because, I think Ethel nailed it when she said that, we are in relationship to place. If you're born there and you have that relationship and you're connected and you have the teachings, then that's a part of it. We can develop our technical skills, and that's really important to do that higher level government-to-government work. But I'm just a very strong proponent and advocate for ensuring that our people are those decision makers, and that we don't delegate it out to somebody else who has a technical ability. They're advisors. They can advise and support us, but the decision-making authority has to rest with the Indigenous people of the land. Otherwise, I read this book about the Aboriginal economy, and it was maddening to me about the parasitic relationship between these people that are our resource people, but they end up being our handlers. And it offends me greatly that this occurs. And so this is a cautionary comment to the delegates here, to ensure that we maintain the authority and the control, and that these resource people know their place in this process, that they're advisors, and the decision-making has to happen by the Indigenous people themselves.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Frank, for that. On that note, I'm going to take us into lunch. I can sense that, I don't know about you, but I'm hungry. And so here's what's going to happen, and a little bit of housekeeping before we totally move to lunch. One is we are going to plan a group photo of everybody. I would like to just kind of mark this. The photo will take place after the plenary, just before the break for supper. It will be taken by Emily, I believe. Oh, great. NationTalk has got us. NationTalk, by the way, are the ones who are providing the live stream, who are videoing this session. and providing our general support. So thank you to NationTalks. I also got an update from our organizing team. There are 85 representatives from nations registered to this event. That is significant. Just thank you all for making the trip. 85 is a great amount, and I'm really glad to see you here. After lunch, you'll notice that we will be breaking into sessions where we'll have much smaller groups to have this discussion. This is your opportunity to, over lunch, to think about your contribution to those breakout sessions. You'll also notice that we are planning to come back into breakout sessions tomorrow, so there will be lots of time over the next 2 days to have your input come in. In terms of the breakout sessions, when you registered, you should have been assigned a number, 1 to 4. I think they're on your name cards, or you've been assigned on your packages. If there's anybody who has not been assigned a number, please come and see Melody, and Melody will assign you a number. The idea here was not to split up the groups regionally. It was really about thinking about the size of the room so that it's just easier to have a chat. So that's the whole goal of the breakout sessions. Everybody will talk about the same thing in all 4 sessions, so you don't have to worry about moving around, or if you're going to miss a part of the conversation, you will be having it. In terms of those who are in group number 1, you will be in what's called the Laurier room. This is this floor, just up a few stairs. I believe it's just outside here. Stephen Nita is going to be your facilitator. Stephen, can you kind of wave and let people see you? So he will be your facilitator, and Melody Morrison will be the scribe and note taker. So everything will be well recorded. We also have a digital recorder in every one of the rooms, so we've got some backup. Don't worry. You say something, we will hear it. Session number 2, breakout group number 2, that will be in the Lady Elgin room. That's on the main floor, past the front desk on the left, just before you get to Starbucks. The facilitator for that session will be Miles Richardson, and the note taker will be Shauna Morgan-Seegers. Breakout session number 3, group 3, you will be in the Ontario room. That's down the main hall, past the front desk, down the flights of stairs on the right, just before you get to the gift shop. You'll see I think there's a bank machine there and other things. It's just down that corridor. I will be your facilitator for that session, and the note taker will be Gabriella. And thank you very much, Gabriella, for volunteering to do that. Group number 4 will be in the Quebec room. Sorry, guys. It's down the main hall, past the front desk, downstairs on the right, just before the gift shop as well. Frank Brown will be your facilitator, and the note taker will be Scott Searson. Thank you very much, Scott. All of these rooms, there will be a sign that has the branding, just like on your agenda here. You'll see signs that have these trees that identify the rooms, and so hopefully you'll be able to find it. If you have any trouble finding any one of the rooms, just come up to the desk. There'll be someone there to help you and guide you on your way. Good? Great. Then have a good lunch. Thank you, everyone.